Welcome to Garden Wise Adventures. My name is Malie, and today is the day I get to start my indoor garden series, and I'm really excited to have you along with me. Now, I decided to start my indoor garden series talking a little bit about hydroponics. Now, we're not going to talk a lot about hydroponics in this series. I'm not an expert. I've grown hydroponically for 2 years. I have 2 units that I use, but it's not the method that I prefer to grow in the most. We're going to talk about the method that I prefer the most in later videos. But I do really enjoy growing hydroponically. And I wanted to go over some of the things that I've learned about hydroponics that maybe will help you. Now, before we get started, I wanted to give you a few resources. Hydroponics is something that you can get pulled down a huge rabbit hole. There are people who absolutely love it, and that's the only way that they will grow. M.I. Gardener recently did a video talking about garden fads, and he listed Aerogarden as one of them. But I don't think it's a fad. I think hydroponics are here to stay, and they are a really good way to garden for a lot of people indoors. Now, I do have an Aerogarden unit. I also have a Devo unit, and there are hundreds of units out there. Now, the resources that I wanted to talk to you about are resources that you could go to learn about which units work, which don't, and kind of learn more about hydroponics and learn what might work the best for you. Now, the first one I wanted to talk about is a Facebook group that I absolutely love called Aerogarden, Kratky, and Gardening Fanatics. Now, I do have to say Fanatics is a good word to use in that Facebook group because there is a lot of them. I am possibly one of them. But there is a lot of excellent information, especially if you use the search function and look in the files about nutrients and lights and units and what kind of plants you can grow hydroponically. And I have to tell you, the sky is the limit for hydroponic growing, and there's so many different ways to do it. Now, you can actually make your own hydroponic units. You can buy expensive units, you can buy big units, small units, you can grow hydroponically in buckets even. There are so many ways to do it, but I wanted to cover the essentials with you and then let you go do your own research and find out what would work best in your situation. Now, I grow in hydroponic units, so the first thing that you need to grow hydroponically is a container. Now, when choosing a container, you need to think about the science behind growing plants hydroponically, and that's what we're going to cover right now. So we'll leave containers for a minute and talk a little bit about the rest of what you need to understand about growing plants hydroponically. Now, when you grow plants hydroponically, what you're doing is you are eliminating soil. You grow plants basically in water and nutrients. Now, the water is very important. How deep the water is very important, and how you have the water contained is very important. When it comes to containers, you want to block as much light as possible that hits the water or any of the wet parts of the plants. Now, the reason you want to do that is you want to eliminate the chance for algae. Now, if any of you have left a clear water bottle out in the sun for a long period of time, you know that it will start growing green algae, and you want to avoid that. So you need a container that is sealed to the point where light does not get into it. Now, you can achieve that in many different ways, but any of your containers that you use will need some sort of lid or a way to block the light. Now, as for the water, I just use plain tap water because I'm not really fanatical how I grow hydroponically. If the plants die, they die. But what happens when you use tap water is you have the possibility of introducing contaminants that may cause root rot. A lot of people who are really more careful about the way they grow hydroponically will grow in distilled water. Distilled water gives you a chance to control the nutrients better. It gives you a chance to eliminate any of the contaminants that might happen that could cause bacterial growth, that might cause root rot, because root rot is your enemy. You do not want your roots rotting. So water is very important, and how you contain that water is important. The next thing that is important is when you're growing hydroponically, plants will need everything that a plant grown in soil will need, but it needs to be all provided by you. So all the nutrients a plant needs to grow will need to be provided by you. And this is where we're going to get into the discussion between synthetic fertilizers and organic fertilizers. Now, I have not heard of a real good way of growing plants hydroponically with organic fertilizers. Now there's several reasons for this. When you have organic fertilizers, most of those fertilizers are not in the form that plants can utilize them. They need to be broken down by microbes. If you're adding your nutrients to just water, they're not going to have the microbes to break the fertilizer down into the nutrients that the plants need. So number one, there may be some nutrients available, but they're not going to be completely available to the plants. The second thing is the fact that you're introducing something that can cause your plant roots to rot. It's something that you can experiment with. You can go through and see if you can find liquid organic fertilizers that have all the nutrients the plant needs to grow, that has all the macronutrients and micronutrients, and that is not going to cause root rot. And you can experiment and try that out, and I would love to hear if you found a way to do it organically without rotting out your roots. So just about everybody that I have seen grows their plants using synthetic fertilizers. Now, synthetic fertilizers are basically fertilizers that are already in the form that plants can use readily without needing to be broken down further. And there's many different types. You can go on Amazon and look it up. It's another rabbit hole you can go down. Everybody has their favorite fertilizers. But when you grow hydroponically, a lot of them call them nutrients because you have to have all of the nutrients, the micronutrients and the macronutrients that the plants need. My very favorite ones for cost effectiveness and for ease of use and for how well they work is Maxi Bloom and Maxi Grow. Now, as I said, there's a lot of them. You can go onto the Facebook group that I've referenced and see what nutrients people like to use there. But I absolutely love Maxi Bloom and Maxi Grow. Matter of fact, I not only use these hydroponically, I use these in all my pot-grown vegetables that I grow indoors. Now, another one that I really like is the Aerogarden fertilizers. Aerogarden came out with its own fertilizer, and it works beautifully. This works on its own, and I actually think it may work even a little bit better than the Maxi Bloom and Maxi Grow. The only issue with the Aerogarden fertilizer is it's extremely expensive. You don't need to use a lot of it. That's why I like to buy it in bulk. And I like to kind of mix it up. Sometimes I'll use the Aerogarden, sometimes I'll use the Maxi Bloom and Maxi Grow. And each of these have different amounts of fertilizer and how they're put together. Now the Aerogarden nutrients, the Maxi Bloom and Maxi Grow, they have different amounts of fertilizer in them. So sometimes I think it's good to mix it up a little bit. The only other thing that I use when gardening indoors is my CalMag. Now, CalMag is calcium and magnesium, and I use it mostly for the magnesium, and I only use it for my tomatoes, peppers, and citrus. Because sometimes the tomatoes and peppers and citrus need a little bit more magnesium than the rest of the nutrients that I have offer. And you can tell that they need more magnesium when the leaves start to yellow and they don't green up when you add more nitrogen. So these are the fertilizers or nutrients that I use for gardening hydroponically and in pots. And they are very important. Now, you may do research and find out something that you like better, and I would love to hear if there's a brand that you like better. So now that we've talked about water and containers and nutrients, let's talk a little bit about light. Now, plants indoors are going to need the same amount of light that they would get outside. So if you have plants that take a little bit less light outdoors, like kale or lettuce, spinach, they can grow in lower lights. You can grow them with a little bit lower lights indoors. If you have tomatoes and peppers, they need a lot of light, and they need the proper kind of light. Now, light is another thing that I will cover in another video, and I'm not going to go really deep into it because that's another rabbit hole that you can be dragged down into the depths of. Lights are important to understand, though. There are different formats of lights that you need to think about. So there's the wavelength of lights, and that is very important. Each wavelength can help plants in different ways. And then there's the warmth or the temperature of lights. There's warm lights and there's cool lights, and they're important too, depending on what type of plants you want to grow. Now for my potted plants, I use the Walmart lights that are 5,000 Kelvin. That is referencing the warmth of the light. And they've been strong enough to be able to help me fruit tomato plants and pepper plants. Now, if I got more expensive lights with a better wavelength, better spectrum, better color, I could probably up my production. But right now I'm happy with what I have. I'm not willing to spend a lot more money on lights at this point, but later I might because it would improve my production. You can spend as much money as you want on lights or as little money as you want. You can grow your plants in the light of a south window and have relative success, but I do have to say you also need to think about the time of year that you're growing. When you're growing plants indoors in the winter, it gets dark earlier and the light is less intense. So what may have been sufficient, the light coming through a window that may have been sufficient over the summer will likely not be sufficient over the winter. So you're going to need to supplement with lights. Now, if you buy set hydroponic units, they come with lights. And not all of those lights are equal. So you need to research which units will have the type of lights that you need and weigh that with how much money you want to spend. Now, the next thing you need to think about is a growing medium. Now, when I say growing medium, I'm not talking about something that's going to support the plants in relation to nutrients like soil is, but something that's going to hold your plant in whatever unit you decide to grow. And there's a couple of different things that you will need. And those things are your net cups, and they come in many different shapes and sizes. If you make your own units and grow in, let's say, plastic tubs, there's 4-inch net cups that will actually help hold your plants up. And then there's net cups that are this size. Now, one thing I think is kind of important when researching hydroponic units is to find a unit that can take a generic size of net cups. There are a lot of units out there that only will take the net cups that they produce, which means that they can charge as much as they want and you can't go out and find generic varieties that will fit. So I like using units that are adaptable to the Aerogarden units because there's a lot of generic places that will produce these net cups for cheaper. So think about that when you're looking at hydroponic units. Now, once you decide the size of net cup that you need to find some sort of sponge that will go inside the net cup. So the sponge goes inside the net cup, the seed goes inside the sponge, and then the roots will grow through the sponge, and that helps hold the plant in your hydroponic unit. It doesn't provide nutrients, it doesn't help with moisture or anything. Its sole function is to hold your plant in the unit. Now, there's many different ones that you could use. Because I purchase units that are compatible with Aerogarden, and Aerogarden has a lot of places you can go to buy generic supplies. I get just the generic sponge in groups of 100 because these are things that you will not be able to recycle or reuse, and it works well for me. There's something else called rock wool that you can use. Rock wool can be bought in many different sizes, and it can be cut down to fit whatever size net cup that you have. Now, there's pros and cons to rock wool, and that's something that you'll need to research on your own. Now, the last thing that I wanted to talk about is oxygen. So all plants grown either in soil or in hydroponic units will need oxygen. Now, there are exceptions where you can grow hydroponically without oxygenated water, but I think it's a little bit more difficult and you have to be a little bit more careful. But if you want to have good success, you need to find a way to oxygenate the water. Now, a lot of the units that you can purchase will actually have pumps, and they will pump water through the unit and it'll oxygenate the water. Now, there's something else called an air stone that you can use. It's something that will pump oxygen into the water, and it's a little less expensive than finding a pump to oxygenate your water. So let's take you in closer to my Aerogarden unit and my Devo unit and go over how they work, and then we're going to plant our first seeds. So now that we know the basics of how to grow plants hydroponically, let's look at this hydroponic unit, this Aerogarden. This is a Aerogarden Bounty, I think. It has a lot of features that I really like. Number one is the light. It's really strong, and let me show you how it telescopes. So this light has a button in the back that allows it to telescope up so that it can fit taller plants. Now, when we look at the top of this tray, I think it's really important, especially when you're looking at other hydroponic units, to make sure that all light is excluded from the water so you don't start growing algae. So these are sealed really tightly. There are some units where light does get in, and you have to be careful when you're choosing your units and research them really well. Make sure that that's not an issue with them. If you get light, you start getting algae. If you start getting algae, you can rot your roots. So let's get this open. Look at what it looks like inside. But when you open up your unit, Most units will contain a pump, like I said. So there's your pump. You have your plug. I do need to rinse this out. It is kind of, before we use it, it is a little bit dirty still. But this is what the reservoir looks like. Now it's very important not to fill your reservoir with water any deeper than it says. Now when you look at the Devo, it is built a little bit different. One thing that I like about this one is you can actually connect to an app on your phone and you can set the lights according to the time frames that you want. You can also set the lights for leafy greens or for flowering and fruiting plants on this one. And the light telescopes up pretty far. It actually is a lot taller than the Aerogarden, so you can fit some pretty tall plants under there. It's a little larger, so you can grow more plants. And this looks like you can grow a ton of plants. Now, I would be very careful about the number of plants that you grow in a hydroponics unit like this. You don't want to crowd them. So I, generally speaking, will grow only 4 plants in this one if it comes to tomatoes or basil or anything big like that. But if there's something like radishes that are smaller, then I will use all of the holes on it. But I'll grow 4 plants in this one, and 2 or 3 plants in this one. Now if we pull this open, it also has a pump, also has a plug, and this one is sealed well enough that no light gets through, and I haven't had any problem with algae. So now that we've talked about the basics of hydroponics, and hopefully I haven't confused you because there is so much that you can learn about hydroponics. There is such a rabbit hole you can get pulled down into that it's really intriguing and interesting, and it's something you could learn about for the rest of your life. But if you want to just do the basics, it's easy enough for a beginner just to grow with the basics. Like I said, just get your basic nutrient mixes that are already mixed, grow easy plants, choose a unit that does it all for you, and it makes it very, very easy to grow plants anywhere in your house. But I'm going to use them to grow tomatoes. Now, I absolutely love growing micro dwarf tomatoes. And if you've never heard of micro dwarf tomatoes, you've missed out on a lot. Micro dwarf tomatoes are exactly what they sound like. They're tomato plants that get up to 12 inches tall in height, and they produce massive amounts of tomatoes, and they're usually cherry tomato size. And there are hundreds of varieties to choose from. And I'm actually starting to save my own seeds. One of my very favorite varieties has turned out to be Orange Hat. Orange Hat tomatoes are really good. They grow beautifully outside, they grow beautifully in pots, and they grow beautifully in hydroponics. They continue to produce all season long. I've actually planted them in December in the past, put them in my hydroponic units, taken them out of the hydroponic units, put them in pots, and then planted them outdoors and had them continue to produce excellent, excellent tomatoes. Another variety that I have that I've saved seeds from, but I still have a few left that I've ordered in the past from Renaissance Seeds, is Ink Spot. They're a darker tomato with a little more depth of flavor, and they have kind of the dark color to them, and I absolutely love the Ink Spot. So these are the 2 that I'm going to grow in my hydroponic units. I'm going to grow a couple of Orange Hat and 1 Ink Spot. My other favorite thing to grow in the hydroponic units are basil. I'm going to do a purple opal basil, and I'm going to do the regular Genovese basil. And the last thing I'm going to grow is my new favorite thing to grow in hydroponic units is radishes. Now you have to think a little bit about how you grow radishes in your hydroponics units. It's not difficult once you know the trick, but these produce very, very quickly. So by the time the tomatoes get large enough to start shading out other plants, the radishes will be finished. But when you plant radishes, you plant them in your units, you grow them the way you normally grow all the other plants, but you carefully watch them. And as the roots begin to swell, as the radishes begin to form, you very carefully take your plants, and we'll go over this as they grow in later videos, but as they grow, you kind of pull them up so that the bulb can form on the top of the unit, and the roots will stay in the water. So that way you can grow radishes as big as you want, and you're not constrained by the size of the net cup that you have. So we're going to plant radishes as a filler, and for something to harvest early before the tomatoes are ready, and tomatoes and basil. So these are my favorite things to grow in hydroponic units, and let's show you how we plant them. So now we're going to add water to our unit. I'm going to try to do this without making a huge mess, which I have a problem with. Get this taller so that I can add it. Now, the important thing to remember when adding water to your units is to make sure everything is clean at the beginning. You don't want to introduce anything that's going to contribute to root rot later. And then when you fill it to the fill line and no deeper. So now that we've got our hydroponics filled with water, the next thing that we need to do is decide what we're going to be growing in each unit and start soaking our sponges. Now the net cups, if you're really careful, are things that you can reuse. You need to clean them really carefully. Sometimes they do get staining on them, but the staining doesn't seem to cause too many problems. But we need to find our sponges, get the sponges in these, and pre-soak them. You want the sponges soaked well before you put the seeds in them. Now I have 18 holes that I can fill, but I only have 12 net cups, and I have a large amount of sponges. So I'm going to start out with the 12 net cups. Most of them are going to be radishes that will be removed once they're finished, and then the tomatoes and basil can fill in. Now I'm only going to put 2 tomato plants in my Aerogarden because it's small. In the other unit, in my Devo unit, I'm going to put 2 microdwarf tomatoes and 2 basils, and the rest of the net cups that I have will be filled with radishes. So let's get those filled. Now, if you notice, these net cups are open at the top and the sponges are really exposed to light. So there's several different things you can do. You can go online and you can purchase these little stickers that you can put over the top that have slits in them, kind of like these Aerogarden ones. I've been reusing these, very carefully removing the plants, and I haven't had to remove the stickers off of those yet. Or you can make your own very cheaply with aluminum foil. All you do is you put the aluminum foil over the top of the net cup, fold it down and over, make sure that it's not too bulky around the bottom, so when you fit it in, let's show you, when you fit it in, it seals tightly down so you don't get light into the water reservoir. But then all you need to do is just do a slit. I'm gonna have to go get my scissors. I need to make more of these foil tops. And then just do a couple of slits, make a little X in there so you can put your seed inside the sponge. We have holes in each one. We've chosen which seeds we're going to plant. The net cups have been soaking. They're pretty wet right now. I think they feel soft and pliable. So I think we're ready to plant the seeds. Oops, I need to get a cover for this one. So I think I'm going to plant the basil first. Now I'm not going to add any nutrients until I see the first set of leaves on the plants. The plants do not need nutrients right now, and it will probably just inhibit their germination to add the nutrients. So as soon as I see those first leaves, then I will add the nutrients. So we're going to add the seeds into just the plain water inside these net cups. Now, I think I'm going to grow 1 of the regular green basil and 2 of the purple basils. So I'm going to add 2 seeds to each net cup, and then we're going to thin down the plants to 1 plant per net cup once they've emerged. So basically all you do is you take the seeds. Let me see if I can get close enough so you can see. So you can see the sponge in there. There's a little hole inside each sponge. I'm just going to drop 2 seeds inside that hole. Sometimes they don't make it all the way in the hole. You can either use a toothpick to get them in the hole, or you can just leave them on top of the sponge, because as long as they're wet, they will germinate. Then we'll add 2 more seeds into this one. These are the green basil. We're going to do an ink spot and an orange hat in the Devo unit here. Once again, even for the tomatoes, we're going to add 2 seeds per sponge and then thin down the plants to 1 plant per net cup. You really don't want more than 1 plant per net cup because it'll just be too crowded and they won't grow well. Now in the Aerogarden unit, we're just going to do 2 orange hat tomatoes. Now, as I said, in the rest of the open net cups, we're going to be adding radishes. The radishes will mature and be harvested before the tomatoes are large enough to crowd them out. Now our units are all planted up. The only thing left is to plug them in and get them ready to grow. Now, when I plug in the Aerogarden, it's not connected to an app. what it will do is, I think it has a 14-hour cycle that starts when you plug in the unit. But I will plug it in, and then tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, which is when I want it to go on normally, I'll unplug it and plug it in again, or I think there's a button I can push to reset the time so that it starts at that time. So then it'll go from 7 to around 9, and it'll match the rest of my lights. Now for my Devo unit, it's a little bit easier. What that will do is I will plug it in, open up my phone app, and then I'll be able to set the time where it goes on and the time when it goes off. So that is all there is to it, to growing hydroponically. There's a lot to learn. It seems a little bit confusing, but it can be very simple and very easy. Check out a YouTube channel called Aerogarden Experiments. The guy who runs Aerogarden Experiments grows everything you can think of in AeroGardens, and in one video, in about 9 or 10 minutes, he will show you how he started planting things, and then he'll take you all the way to harvest and tell you whether or not he thinks it's worth growing hydroponically. And it's called Aerogarden Experiments, but he does trial a huge number of different grow units, and he'll tell you which units he thinks work well and which ones he doesn't. He does compare them to how he likes the AeroGarden, but he uses a lot of different units. So if you want to know which ones work well, you can look at his channel and pick the videos that fit what you were looking for. So there's a lot of information out there, and hopefully this video has been helpful for you. If it has been helpful, I hope you like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and go have a wonderful garden adventure.